Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode or to watch. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, we had the continued search for the sword Gawain by obviously Carcer and Wants, and also The Watch. Obviously, you have Lady Rampkin. She was able to kind of snatch a little bit of Wants's hair, but we find out the reason why she got found out is because of her new squeaky boots, which I love that that's like a whole bit in the episode, because it's like, why do you have their squeaky boots, which that turns into a whole conversation where Sam is talking about the fact is that she spends so much money on boots. He's like, look at my boots, they're like $10, they're cheap, but he's like, the fact is I could close my eyes and feel the stones of like what's beneath my toes and know exactly where I am. Like, you could basically, your shoes can keep your feet dry for 10 years. He's like, basically, I could spend $400 or $500 in that time frame and still have wet feet. And then she basically turned it into a whole thing like, oh, what's this? The Sam Vine story about the economics. I forgot what she said, but he was like, no. And he's like, actually, no, that's actually really good. I'm going to take that. But basically, she was saying, like, you don't know what I spend my money on. And I'm wondering what that is. Because for Sam, it's like, the fact is that she always just does whatever she wants. It's like, we have a plan and everything. The reason why things don't always work out is because you're so gung-ho. You just kind of think like, because I think in his mind, it's almost like you feel like the rules don't apply to you. You come from this privileged position. But I think for her, it's like, don't think you know me and know exactly, what I spend my money on. I'm curious what that is. Like, I'm assuming we'd find that out sooner or later because she made such a point to say that. So I guess she uses her money to kind of help out. Maybe Sam's not aware of that yet, but, or maybe not. I don't know. It just seemed like she's kind of implying, like, I do other stuff with my money. Don't think I'm just some pompous, rich person who does whatever with my money. I think she tries to do good with it because she's trying to change this world. Obviously, it's a very effed up and messed up world with the way things kind of, one particular town, because this town, this city/town's the only place that does the whole thing with the guilds, letting them kind of run rampant, and kind of as long as you like organize crime to a certain extent, like this town's the only one that really does that. That's why when Carrot got here, it was like, what the hell? So it's kind of become normal, and like she's trying to fight that normality in that regard. I did like that. Obviously, Sam talks to Sherry about it, like the whole like, oh yeah, he had a dream about, he saw something when he was incarcerated about being with someone. Obviously, he didn't go into details about it being Lady Rampkin, but Sherry was like, basically take those, she ends up saying this to both, kind of to Sam and to Carrot, that basically take the chance while you have the chance. So I'm wondering, did Sherry have a chance in the past, but she didn't take it? I wonder, is that what that's kind of implying, because obviously she's still kind of an enigma. We still don't know a lot about her to a certain extent. Once again, we still never circle back to the whole thing of she can see ghosts and why that is. I mean, granted, she hasn't seen them in a while, but I'm still curious, like, what will become of that, if anything. You also have her examining Good Boy, because it's like, well, by examining Good Boy, we can understand how to deal with the noble dragon that's kind of running rampant. But I did like at one point, Sam starts playing the guitar because it almost seemed like Good Boy was singing, but it seems like it might have been because when they stopped, Good Boy kept going, so there's some kind of resonance between Good Boy and the noble dragon. I mean, they are both dragons. So I'm wondering, it seems like that might be setting up the fact is that Good Boy might be a key to this whole noble dragon thing, or maybe that's like foreshadowing things are actually going to get worse because there's some resonance between them. Maybe Good Boy might actually go super bad, considering like Good Boy kind of like it's kind of like a little bit of teen Groot from the Infinity War and Endgame, or more so Infinity War and the end of Guardians 2, just me like kind of like, oh, I get my, well, this is more so in the child sense of that it kind of does whatever it wants. It's like, oh, I don't get my way, I'm going to burn you. So, I don't know. We'll see kind of what happens on that front. And since I did bring it up, there is an interesting thing where Carrot has feelings for Angua, but she's kind of unaware of it, or maybe she is, but she's not really, jumping at the bit with the whole situation. And I love Sherry being like, no, like, try it out with me. Like, obviously you want to take a shot, go ahead, tell her, just have a conversation with he's like, so do you like bread? And Sherry's like, do you like bread? Do you like bread? And walks away just dumbfounded by being like, do you like bread? It's like, that's your opening line? You know, I love that. I love that there's also that whole situation where obviously Angua was leading them towards where they thought Wants was, but it ended up being a trap. Them surrounded by goblins. Side note, what's up with the goblins? Is that going to turn into like a huge plot point? Because that keeps being like, it seemed like they're making a point to make that like a subplot. And once again, does no one understand the goblins? Because it doesn't seem like Carcer does. I don't know. Because it's like just the bits back and forth between the goblins. And it's just like, oh, like we should kind of become a thing. It's like, no, it was a one night stand type of thing. I'm like, and we're just kind of ignoring all this gold that's happening in front of us. It's like I said, I don't think anyone else can understand. But I love Sherry being like, yeah, if we're going to die here, I guess we should all confess. It's like, remember that time you lost your eyebrows? Yeah, that was me. And Sam's like, that was you. It's like, yeah, we're doing an eyebrow experiment, you know. But luckily, Spike, who Sherry had shown kindness to, ended up saving them. That was a whole interesting thing. Which I guess, I wonder, is Spike going to become part of the team, or are we just going to see Spike just kicking it with Sherry from time to time? Because it's like, oh, you showed me kind of, so I'm going to kick it with you. Especially because later on, Sherry ends up, you know, stitching Spike up, you know? So I'm curious to kind of see what ends up happening because of that. Which I love later on when, like, Sam's about to start drinking and then Lady Ramkin just downs the entire bottle. But it's also just kind of like, for her, she's like, someone out there is going to have a clue about all of this. Like, that obviously someone out there is seeing something that we're not seeing, and it's going to piece it all together, and we're going to figure this whole thing out. And I love her being like, and now I think I'm going to be sick. You know, it's like, well, you did just like guzzle down an entire bottle. I love like Angela had like a cigar or something in her mouth and she took it out, and just everyone's just being like, wow, just amazed at her just chugging that down. But at the same time, you had Carcer and Wants. It's like, oh, we're going to the most evil and vile place, and they open up because they're getting their weapons ready, and it ends up being like essentially an old folks' home. And I'm like, oh, and it's like, is that you, Michelle? It's like, no, that's not Michelle. And then she's like, oh, so what are you doing, Michelle? And then Carcer's like, what? And it's like, they end up finding, because obviously they're looking for Jocasta, and they end up finding her room. And it turns out she's kind of losing her memory, but she has like her story like drawn on the wall so that she could remember it, even though she, you know, time was, you know, stealing that story away from her. I also love some of the background announcements, because at one point it's like, to all the vampires here, note there is garlic in the soup. Also, priest croutons. I'm like, wait, what? Also kind of acknowledging, like, hey, there's vampires in this universe, which I think is interesting, just knowing, like, obviously there's goblins, and, aren't they imps, the ones that are inside the cameras? I didn't talk about them in the first two episodes. I should have, but I didn't, because I forgot to, but it's like, there's imps, obviously we have wizards. Most everybody else is just kind of like a normal human. Obviously we have werewolves, but once again, I'm also curious, like, about Angela's thing. I brought that up in, like, the first episode or two, like, is she like like she has scars on her body, so it seems like, you know, werewolfism is kind of like a curse in this, but I wonder, are there people who are natural born werewolves? I don't think she's one. Like I said, because of the scratches on her body, I'd assume she was, you know, a curse was passed to her, but we don't fully know how the whole werewolf stuff works. We haven't really dived into that. But circling back to it, Jocasta had stolen Gawain with someone else from the Assassin's Guild named Perpetua. But, you know, they traveled, we saw their story, and then it seemed like Perpetua ended up stealing the sword and betraying Jocasta is kind of what it seemed like. So it's like, well, if she died with the sword, that means that she was buried, because obviously it turns out Perpetua's tomb is right above Jocasta's, like, you know, slab at the Assassin's Guild. What was also really interesting is when Jocasta looks at Carcer and it's like, oh, you were erased. You're not familiar. You're not from this story or something like that. So kind of some part of her was, I guess, to be able to kind of see the insight to his situation to a certain extent. So, and also his goblin situation gets complicated because one of the goblins is like, oh my God, that's my husband. You're here. I thought you were dead. I thought you died at Throats. It's like, no, that was just a flesh wound. I'm working here now. And they end up reuniting, and it's like, oh, like, you know, I got to, you know, it's actually good work here. And later on, it's like, do we get, you know, healthcare benefits here? And the other one got pissed because it was supposed to be like it was supposed to be us. This was supposed to be a revolution, but here you are just, you know, working for essentially it's kind of like you're working for the man, and you know this isn't the revolution we were going for. Trying to get a revolution for the goblins, you know, and it's like that's the whole reason why they were working with Carcer. But now it's like, oh, this is a union of one. I have to kind of handle. So Carcer's down to one goblin. I don't know, like he was looking in the direction of the goblin while I was talking, but I don't know if he understands. I don't know if they'll ever explain that bit about whether or not they understand each other or not. But obviously they find the sword, but the sword doesn't work because it's not the right hilt, because Perpetua left the hilt with Jocasta, which there's that whole thing of, you know, Carrot finding the note, you know, and running into death. I'm like, I guess every member of this team is going to run into death at some point in time and have a heart-to-heart with him. And it's like, oh, and he's like, oh, you're not scared of me. He's like, yeah, living in the mines, we always figured it was, you know, that type of line of work. It's like, of course, death's surrounding you. We always felt like you were there, even though none of us ever saw you. But it's like, hey, man, it's got to be tough. And it's, you know, it's kind of a day in and day out job. He's like, yeah, it is kind of tough. You know, there's kind of no breaks, you know. It's like, he's like, especially must spend a lot of time here. He's like, yeah, the weekends and stuff like that. He's like, yeah, it's got to be pretty long. He's like, it actually is pretty long. He's like, actually, do you want to hang out sometime? And then Carrot's like, sorry. He's like, and then Death's like, what? Huh? Nothing. Forget I said anything. I gotta go. I was like, all for him. I should also notice, note I thought was interesting. He only voices a character, but it's Wendell Price. The most recent thing, I know him from is, Jack Ryan. God, what's his character's name? It's been a little bit, so I'm blanking. He's the older kind of senior officer that Ryan works with. I mean, Wendell Price has popped up in different things. He played, what's Meghan Markle's character's name from Suits? Was it Rachel? I don't remember. It's not Rachel. I forgot what it was. It's been so long since I've seen Suits. But I know he played her dad, because I think he's more prominent in the later seasons. The last season I ever watched was like season 2, and even, yeah, so I need to circle back around, especially now that Suits is done. I do need to go back and just like rewatch the entire series. Tangents and all that. It was just, I've been meaning to bring that up because I kept seeing his name in the cast, but I kept forgetting to bring it up. But I'm like, at this point, it's like, yeah, everyone's making a point to run into death. So eventually everyone a part of the watch is going to run into death under some other circumstances. And I'm curious to see what everyone's interaction with death is going to be. Especially Sherry, considering like, the being able to see ghost thing. Part of me thinks like maybe there's going to be some like storyline beat where they kind of talk about that. Especially Angela's situation about being a werewolf and killing. That kind of plays a part in her story as well. But that whole interaction actually made Carrot realize, like, you know, what this whole thing was about. Because the actual piece to the sword was actually still there because she had it, because he, you know, I forgot what he necessarily, I think it was like, you can't take it with you. And so basically the cane was left there for her to kind of use. And it turns out, hey, the cane actually had part of the hilt. Now they just needed the sword, but Carson's going to come here because he's going to need it. And so it's like, all right, Sam's like, I'm going to do my plan. And other people are starting, Swires was kind of like, oh, well, about the violence. He's like, no, we're going to do my plan. He's like, I am tired of other people telling me what to do. He's like, I'm put my foot down this high. We're going to do my plan and we're going to do it. You understand? Everyone's like, all right. You know, because especially because no one ever, like, especially when he's formulated a plan, Lady Ramkin's just running off doing her own thing. So it doesn't always work out, you know, so I love that it's like the reveal of like, okay, I was like, who's wearing the squeaky boots? Because it's definitely not going to be Lady Ramkin, and it's the husband goblin. And I thought it was like, oh, he's like, these are killing me. And so everyone's getting ready to lock and load, get ready to fight between Wants and Lady Ramkin. I love the whole bit where it's just kind of like, I was hoping you would say that. Well, I was hoping you would say that. Well, I was hoping you would say that. I'm like, really? And then it's like, before they could get to it, like basically the way what Swires was trying to explain is no violence can take place there, because basically it's a spell that takes all those people who are trying to fight and turns it into a dance party. So you have Carcer and Sam dancing, and you have Wants and Lady Ramkin dancing, and everyone, and even Spike being like, "Whoa, they got some pretty dope moves." But obviously, there's a conversation between Sam and Carson where it's like, "Where have you been?" It's like, why do you still look like a kid? He's like, "I was never a kid because growing up on the streets, he had to." He had to grow up really quickly. Even the spot where he picked, he told Wants, like, that's where he got dumped off at. So this is the best place to start a fire for everyone in the city to see. Like, I guess that was kind of the place he was kind of, the place he was dropped off, where I guess his second part of, like, the second, or where his life really began, I guess, to a certain extent, which is actually kind of sad because, you find out Carrot got dropped down a mine shaft. Sherry kind of has a similar backstory. So for it to be kind of like, kids that were just kind of abandoned. I mean, I think that's what the through line for this whole storyline is for a lot of people who kind of, especially amongst the Watch, a whole bunch of misfits finding their way to each other. Those who kind of had no other place to belong, So I found it fascinating that he chose that spot, and that was kind of his background for it. But like, he was in a process of explaining to Sam. It's like, what happened when you fell? It's like, I fell and I hit the ground, but not the ground in front of the university, and he got portaled away. Luckily, Lady Ramkin has the hilt, and Wants gets away. But now it's a whole, we find out Carson's thing, and it turns out to be what I thought it was. He went to the future. The group he's working with is a group, basically they're observers. Basically, they're kind of like the Time Masters of Legends of Tomorrow, kind of, I guess, sort of like the Time Lords of like Doctor Who to a certain extent, where it's kind of like Time Lords are kind of their own thing, but I think the Time Masters would be a more apt description. I mean, probably a more apt description would be the literal observers from Fringe, where it's like we're meant to like chronicle, like be there through crucial moments in history. For them, it's like it's about balancing out reality, and the reason why they want Carcer, it's like you were about to tell a mortal about our situation, about the truth of your circumstances. He's like, I didn't want to come to the future. It's like, well, we kept you alive because we needed you to be our blunt instrument to go back and destroy the Watch because they're our enemy. Basically, destroy them when at a point where they're still in their infancy, in the sense that because this is a point in history where the Watch isn't as highly regarded as it was in the past. They're kind of on the low end, but it's like eventually they're starting to believe in themselves now. Eventually they will inspire others, and it will spread this wildfire of basically kind of like the Observer's kind of like a spread of like imagination. So I think it's like basically the Observers want reality to be in a stable, controllable situation of where it's ruled by kind of like science and not letting imagination and people kind of believing in themselves kind of run rampant. I think it's a little bit more about controlling everything, and it's like that path will be lost to us if we keep letting the Watch go down the path that they eventually go to. So we have to go back into a point in time where they're kind of at their lowest and wipe them out. That's why they want Carcer to do what they do. But even Carcer's kind of like, there's a lot more to everything. You guys are just what you are, so you're not willing to kind of see things the way I am. I'm able to look into a guy's eyes, a man's eye, and realize what dreams he has and everything. So you still need me because I have that I can come at this from a human level. And it's like, all right, well, you do that. Do not fail us again. Okay, cool. Bye. And it's just like this awkward thing. And he's like, so is there like a door? I even love the whole thing of like, you were in, I forgot what they were saying, like a void or whatever. So it's like, if you don't step off the edge, because then you'll fall for eternity. Well, and you'll also be dying for eternity. So you'll be constantly stuck in basically this loop of eternal pain. So keep that in mind. I love that there's an announcement for the place and stuff like that. But, they end up, putting the hilt and the sword together, and then the sword, like there's this song playing, and it's like, oh, sorry about that. That was my my theme tune. Basically, it scares away barbarians, and also what was it? It was some kind of animal. I was about to say, it was not platypuses. It was something artichokes. I forgot what aardvarks. I think that's what it was. And it turns out the sword's name is Gawain. But it's like, you can call me Wayne. It's like, so Gawain, the thing to stop the noble dragon is a talking sword named Wayne. I also thought that was an interesting development when it's revealed, like Wayne's like, oh, the only way you can hear me is if you've kind of got love in your heart. Like if you're kind of in love, it takes like a powerful love for me. And everyone's kind of awkward around each other. Lady Ramkin and Sam was like, yeah, they have love. I don't know what you're talking about. And then like you have Angle being like, yeah, these are my colleagues. And then Carrot's like, yeah, we're good. We're just really good friends. And Sherry's like, all right, pull back a little bit on that. But then like the whole thing made, Carrot realized like what he saw in front of him was kind of a love story, because it's like Perpetua and Jocasta weren't seduced by Gwen. Gwen awakened because of them, because of their love. Because it's like, you're from the Assassin's Guild, so you're supposed to like hold back your emotions, but they fell in love. Like, and that powerful emotion, probably especially considering they were supposed to repress it and they found each other. It led to them awakening Gwen, and they basically, that story wasn't them a story of betrayal of Perpetua leaving Jocasta, just betraying her by taking the sword. It's like, no, it was a story about basically Jocasta eventually remembers, like, being able to read between the lines, that Perpetua is like, she can no longer take this journey with me, so I'm gonna lead the Assassin's Guild away, because they left the Assassin's Guild. They were run. That's why they were being chased, not just for the sword, but also because it might have because they don't know the significance of the sword. At least their leader, she doesn't know, because that was like the whole thing that Lord Vetinari made a whole point about that last episode. But regardless, I've been on a huge tangent, but obviously Gawain can't really give them too many answers. I guess just his whole thing is kind of like not really giving you answers, but obviously Perpetua and Jocasta spent a lot of time with the sword, so maybe he let something slip back then, so they take her to the library to kind of see what's kind of unseen, because by going to that room where you can hear people's thoughts, at first it's like, oh, Carrot, why don't you and Angela go in there? And he was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Sharon's like, no, go ahead. And obviously getting inside everyone's head, especially Angela, because for her, it's like she can resonate a little bit with Jocasta about like the whole having love in your heart while also being a killer. And it's like, you want that, as you're worried about whether or not you can find love, you being what you are. Like, it's like, not only am I a werewolf, but I also kill people. I could also end up killing someone that I care about if I'm not careful. But then she's also talking to Carrot about, like, it's like you're afraid that she might leave you behind. It's like, I just want to know, he just wants to know if it's possible, I guess just to kind of be a part of her life, to kind of be there for her and be there with her, and, it's thinking about, connecting with her about, her reading through the rest of the note, what was kind of hidden about, like, like I said, she can't continue this journey anymore, so I'm going to leave her here and lead the Assassin Guild away. So that's how she most likely died, was the Assassin Guild finally caught up to her. But it's like, because no one can actually hurt Jocasta because of the way that Twilight place works. Obviously, no violence can take place there, so she'll always be safe. And so it's actually sweet that this ended up being, this love story, but it's like, how long can I stay here? And she realizes, like, oh, not forever, nothing lasts forever. But then you have Carrot being like, but it can, so I think it's just in this moment, and even if you might not be able to remember, it's still there somewhere deep down. So, because obviously she can't stay there forever, because if she does, she'll end up like, the librarian who got transformed. So now they have the sword, so it's like, okay, so what do we do about that? They're planning on like interrogating. Well, actually, Sam was planning on locking it away, because it's like, without the sword, you don't have to worry about anyone, ever using it. But Lord Vetinari has their own plan, in the sense that, like, it's like, we spent so much time trying to fight crime, and now, they've figured things out. So it's like, same thing in this situation with the dragon. Here's all these bounty hunters who tried to kill it. It's like, well, rather than trying to fight it, how about we just basically learn to control it? So that's why you didn't want the Assassin's Guild to know about it, because you want the power and everything to be for you. And even Sam was like, should we really be doing that? And obviously it's like, you do what I say or there's consequences. Now, what that necessarily entails, who knows? But obviously it hit Sam like hard where he's just like drinking later, even burning himself hand over the candle, while Carcer's setting up the Thief Guild to steal the sword from him. So, because there's also the connection about all the other magical artifacts, ancient artifacts, kind of along the same line, because he's aware of them, because obviously they all play their own roles in rituals. So it's not only about controlling the dragon, it's about finding them as well. So now, the Watch is in this tough place, in particular Sam, where it's like, well, we've kind of got our orders. We still don't understand. Well, I guess it's because, Ventinari kind of runs things, so it's like there's no going against that, or even being the Watch. But maybe this kind of ties into what the observers are talking about them kind of having confidence and kind of, inspiring others to kind of, especially with I guess Lady Rampkin's point of view, and, Carrot's, sense of justice and everything will eventually fold in, slowly but surely. They're both, Angle is changing and so is Sam, so it's going to be interesting to see ultimately where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.